The concept of citizenship has evolved from the time when it was only restricted to men and denied to women and slaves. Over a number of centuries, the concept of citizenship has now come to include a notion of social contract, a legal contract between people and the state that they are part of. It comes with rights, but it also comes with responsibilities of the citizens. The state also has responsibility to protect the citizens, but citizens can only benefit from the fruits of being members of a state if they also respect the institutions and also perform their responsibilities effectively. In times of crisis, the question of responsibility and even rights comes into being. Often we see that in times of crisis, according to liberal thinking, the state can do away with the rights of citizens for the greater good of the community. It doesn't mean that citizens have to blindly accept it, but what it does mean is that if it is for the good of the larger community and is fully explained to the people, to the citizens, the sheer essence of belonging to a community requires them to respect the state laws, institutions, and the decisions that the state has taken. What I want to particularly talk about is now how COVID-19 or coronavirus crisis is impacting on citizens all around the world and what are their responsibilities. As someone of Pakistani origin who has lived in Australia for a number of years, I would like to first draw on my experiences in Australia as a citizen. As soon as a crisis started, or as soon as its significance and the threat to overall security became apparent, the national government, in consultation with state governments, came up with a number of decisions which initially restricted the ability of people to be together in group situations. Social distancing was introduced, but also the number of people who could be in one place was restricted. And over a period of time, this restriction actually extended to such a state that only one person can visit another household, and you cannot be out in the public unless it's for absolutely identifiable and accepted reasons. In Western Australia, where I live, the state government, in fact, even closed the borders of the state. So if you happen to be from another state within Australia, wanting to enter Western Australia, with very few exceptions, you have to be in quarantine for at least 14 days. Now, how did citizens accept that? I think a number of citizens in Australia and Western Australia have demonstrated that they do respect the steps that the state has taken, and they have been very responsible in the process. It doesn't mean that there aren't cases, for example, very recently and previously as well, where people decided to go to the beaches but not really observe social distancing rules. But overall, people have actually accepted that because it's very clear that the state has come up with these principles and these rules and regulations for the greater good of the community. Even Muslims living in Australia have been party to this understanding. As soon as the government came up with the decision that only 5 people in prayer places could be present at any one time, and only those who are employed there, Muslims got together, Australian National Islamic, Australian National Imam Council issued a fatwa, which basically supported these demands on Islamic lines and started ensuring that the prayers are streamlined. So now that Ramadan has started in Australia, all Muslims who wish to participate in it, they have access to online Friday prayers, Tarawih prayers, and any other educational requirements that they may have. Now, what does it tell us about responsibility of citizens in crisis in countries like Pakistan, which is a developing country with the second largest Muslim population and with very low Human Development Index rating? I would argue that in crisis like this, which is very novel, which is, even if we find a comparison, the only comparison we could find is in 1918, but in its present form, it's threatening humans across the globe in a way that our health systems, whether from developed countries or developing countries, has not seen in the past. In a country like Pakistan, where social distancing is difficult because of the number of people and available facilities, I could easily understand why within families' spheres, it may not be possible. But it still doesn't mean that the citizens don't have a responsibility to listen to the government's decisions in terms of restricting movement and in terms of ensuring that the greater good of the community, which is the safety and the health and the life of the people, is guaranteed. As I'm sure everyone is aware, in the recent past, some ulama in Pakistan criticized the government for limiting access to the mosques, and even before the Ramadan started, they came up with this agreement with the president, which was also repeated by the Prime Minister, that the 20 points that would identify how they could operate in mosques during Ramadan would be respected. I would argue that having come to that agreement, it is the responsibility of those religious scholars and the mosques and even the mosque goers to make sure that they abide by these requirements. But at the same time, I think the responsibility to be good, responsible citizens in Pakistan at this time doesn't just simply limit itself to the mosque space or the religious space. I'm aware of a lot of cases with some photographs that I've got access to where people have not been observing social distancing in public spaces. If we were to compare it to Australian space, the number of people in one place and the proximity between them, I would really clearly establish that social distancing is not being practiced. I think by doing that, by ignoring the government rules, either because there's a sense of lack of trust in what the government says or a sense of concern about how America may have promoted this idea, or even some other conspiracy theories. The reality is that ignoring these requirements that have been laid out by the government in line with the directives of the World Health Organization really puts us in a position where we as citizens, and I'm now talking about it in my identity as a Pakistani citizen as well, that we as citizens are not only making our lives difficult, putting ourselves under threat, but we're also threatening the safety of others. Because, as you would be aware, the ability of government to provide the ventilators, if it comes to that, is severely limited. And also it's been combined with the fact that almost 4 out of 5 cases in Pakistan of coronavirus are really through person-to-person communication. So if citizens ignore their responsibility to practice social distancing, listen to the government when it comes to following directives vis-a-vis controlling coronavirus, my concern is that we will not be behaving as good citizens. And in a country that is a Muslim majority country, we won't be behaving as good Muslims. And so overall, where do I end my message? My argument is that in an age where we talk about freedom, democracy, rights, and responsibilities, the concept of citizenship cannot be separated from the responsibility of the citizens to accept the limits laid vis-a-vis their rights in times of crisis and follow those limits. It does not mean that the citizens have to accept limits that are not related to crises, but it does mean that when it's the good of the whole community, when it's the life, health, and safety of the community, citizens cannot shirk that responsibility in the name of either individualism, their particular ethnic responsibilities, or even their own religious interpretations.